Today, what I want to talk about is the fourth industrial revolution. But before I start, I want to say something about Professor Barash. I came here as a graduate student in 1985, and it was a time of tremendous flux again. And it was a time when the Japanese companies like Toyota were really putting pressure on American manufacturing. And at that time, computer-integrated manufacturing was a big idea. It was seen as the answer to the competitiveness challenge from the Japanese. And the epicenter of all this was right here on campus. We had just won a very large grant from the National Science Foundation to set up an ERC, an Engineering Research Center. My coming here was actually funded by this grant. And one of the architects of that was Professor Barash. And it was just a wonderful time to be on campus. There was also Jim Solberg, the late Dale Compton. And these people inspired a love and passion for manufacturing, which persists through this day, even though currently I ostensibly run a bank. And I think that's what great teachers do. They inspire you, and certainly Professor Barash was one of the greats. As I said, I want to talk about the fourth industrial revolution, but I'm going to start actually with a story. And the story is this. In the year 1750, India, the country I come from, was one of the wealthiest in the world. It accounted for 25% of global industrial production. China accounted for another 25%. But in just 150 years, by the year 1900, India's share of global industrial output had declined to 1.6%, just dramatic. And when you look back at this, there are really two reasons why it happened. And the first is colonization by Britain, which was a very exploitative process. But the other reason was India missed out on what was the first industrial revolution. We, I think, all know what the first industrial revolution was. It was sparked by the invention of the steam engine. And it resulted in railroads. But it also resulted in steam-powered machines, particularly textile looms. In those days, the big employment generator for any society was the making of cloth. And the steam-powered loom essentially created a productivity revolution that just decimated India's handloom industry. And so millions upon millions of weavers and spinners lost their livelihood. They were, thrust into poverty and famine. And India deindustrialized implosively. And only now, lately in the last 20 years or so, are we beginning to claw our way out of that poverty. Something similar happened to China for slightly different reasons. The difference being that China has managed to reindustrialize with a vengeance in the last 30 years. India is just beginning that journey. Now, why is this historical anecdote relevant to all of you in this room today, and why is it relevant to our times? Well, it's because industrial revolution, disruptive innovation, has crept into, I think, the popular lexicon. And typically it's used in business to describe, for instance, Apple with its iPhone. So a new technology with a new business model comes in and it destroys everything that preceded it. So Nokia, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, all wiped away by the iPhone. And something exactly the same happens at the level of countries and societies as well, this time caused by industrial revolutions. And so those countries that manage to seize these opportunities, these windows of opportunity, go from rags to riches, like Britain did. And those that miss out tend to get washed away and go, conversely, from riches to rags, like what happened to India and China. Now, the second industrial revolution, if you recollect, was seized most aggressively by the United States. So that was all about mass production and electrification. And thanks to entrepreneurs and inventors like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, America, was much more agile and forceful in riding that wave. And it became very quickly, in 30 years or 40 years, the preeminent industrial power. And America extended its lead over the rest by, again, being a pioneer of the third industrial revolution, which was all about computers. It was first mainframes, then minis, then the PC revolution. And if you think back right from the 60s till today, the whole sort of computer revolution has been overwhelmingly dominated by American firms. First IBM, then Digital, then Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, whatever. now the likes of Google and Facebook and so forth. So this issue of riches to rags, rags to riches is a really, really powerful one. Now, today we are in the early stages of what is being called the fourth industrial revolution. And I like to ask, just everybody I run into, what does the fourth industrial revolution mean to you? And you get so many different answers. It's like the old parable of the blind man and feeling up an elephant. But it actually is really shorthand. There's no precise definition, but it's shorthand for massive advances, concurrent advances in many, many disparate fields. So it's about big advances in computer science, particularly in the field of artificial intelligence. I think it seems more and more likely that in our lifetime, we will see that moment called singularity, where computers converge with human intelligence and then surpass it, or at least some aspects of human intelligence. Already we are seeing autonomous drones and driverless cars, and if they're not more ubiquitous, they're held back not by technology, but by regulation. We're seeing huge advances in space travel, particularly the cost of space travel, right? You might have read about Falcon 9 and how it came back, and so the idea of reusable rockets is pretty powerful. I think it's fairly likely that, again, in at least your lifetime, if not mine, we'll see a colony on Mars. We're seeing big advances in the life sciences. So, for instance, gene editing using tools like CRISPR. So you can almost design an organism with certain traits that you want. And robots. This morning I was talking to some colleagues from the faculty at industrial engineering. So robots are clearly making their way from the factory floor into homes and offices. And so there's this blossoming of advances in all these fields at the same time. And at their root, at their foundation, is what I like to call science-based innovation, right? It's advances in sciences and sort of conversion of multiple fields that's driving this. Now, what's really interesting about the fourth industrial revolution is for the first time ever, you're seeing an integration of physical systems, information systems, and biological systems. And we're tinkering with life itself. And therefore, at least I believe, and I think most people who think about it for a second would come to the conclusion that this wave of disruption is likely to be even bigger than the previous three waves. And the policy question for every country is, are we going to be able to ride this to prosperity? Or are we going to miss out and be washed away like a tidal wave washes away everything? This is a hugely important question, particularly for a country like India or China, right? Because India is just, as I said, clawing its way out of a low-income country. We're now a low-middle-income country. Will we be able to seize this moment and become a wealthy country? Or are we again going to miss the bus? Are we going to be colonized again, this time not by a country, but by companies? That's a very real possibility. If you miss out, if the innovation is happening elsewhere, you're going to be dependent on that innovation. I notice Professor Barash's son is actually a patent attorney, so I worry about what the licensing cost in terms of all this will be for our country. So it's pretty important. And right now, the news for India particularly is not very good. Why? Because we don't have many world-class research institutions. We have lots of colleges that teach well, but we don't have a great many world-class research institutions. And therefore, when you think about how many Indian companies are at the forefront of these important new areas, it's hard to think of any. That doesn't mean there aren't very good Indian companies, but they're all playing the catch-up game of yesterday's technologies. China, on the other hand, I think has done far better in closing that gap. I think they've been more intentional, more disciplined, poured more resources into playing catch-up. So I think, at least from where I sit, I think their chances are slightly better. The US is actually in a remarkably good shape. When you think about the number of companies in all these areas, there are quite a few American firms. And one of the questions that I've been asking myself, and those of us who think about these issues, policymakers in India, we think about is, why is it that America has so successfully created wave after wave of innovative companies? Is it an accident? Clearly it's not. It's, in our minds, it's the product of a system, a very well-designed system that has evolved over many decades. At the core of that system is world-class research institutions, universities like Caltech, Stanford, MIT, some parts of Purdue. A lot of private research labs like Microsoft Research, GE, IBM, etc. Immigration policies, I think, have played a phenomenally important role. And just looking at this room, you can, you see evidence of that. America has always been able to attract the best and brightest from every country who flock to these research institutions. All the long-term and really risky research is funded by the US government, thanks to agencies like DARPA and NSF. This is a huge contrast with how things happen in most other countries. And then most importantly, the output of this research is monetized or commercialized using the entrepreneurial ecosystems of places like Silicon Valley, Route 128, Seattle, etc. And so if the president wants to make America great again, it's not going to be by reversing globalization and closing the doors on immigration. It is going to be by embracing these new opportunities with greater vigor, and which means investing more in world-class research capability, and more importantly, thinking through hard how to create many more entrepreneurial ecosystems, not just in the Bay Area, etc., but right here in Illinois, Lafayette, etc. So in the last 2 days, I've been wondering, why is it that there hasn't been a blossoming of entrepreneurship out here? After all, you've got a great many smart people, there's a lot of IP being generated, but the commercialization aspect in West Lafayette or Urbana-Champaign, all these places, is still a little nascent, right? So what will it take to really commercialize what's happening out here? And I think that's the kind of policy question. So in every country, what you're going to see are rich policy issues. They obviously differ depending on whether you're at the front end or you're trying to play catch up. But I think this is a window of opportunity that no country can afford to miss. Now, what does this mean for companies? Right? So we talked about countries and societies. What does this mean for companies? The most interesting thing I think about the fourth industrial revolution is how it causes a disaggregation of the world we live in into the world of atoms versus the world of bits. This is not a new idea. It was first articulated, I think, by Nicholas Negroponte in the mid-90s. He wrote a powerful book called Being Digital. And even though it's 20 years later, it's still worth a read. And he's sort of predicted that this disaggregation would happen. And he said that those who control the flow of bits will be the ones who are dominant. And it turned out to be an uncannily prescient prediction. Right? We first saw this play out in the music industry 15 years ago. The rise of file formats like MP3, and then there was file sharing services like Napster, and then people closed them down. And then it led to cloud services like iTunes, Spotify, etc. They've completely destroyed the economic model of the old music industry, and now it's being re-architected in a different form. But guess who are the big winners in that? People like iTunes, right? Apple. Same thing has played out in the publishing industry. Thanks to search engines, particularly Google, social media, basically all content became free. And that ripped out the economic underpinnings of good journalism. I think that's really, really the rise of fake news and all these problems. There's no one to curate it. And so you've seen organizations like Newsweek, go from dominance to bankruptcy in 5 years. And now what you're seeing is the same phenomena, atoms versus bits, playing out in industry after industry after industry. Take a look at retailing. Look at the rise of Amazon. Nobody would have predicted even 5-7 years ago that anyone would be able to challenge the dominance of Walmart quite so soon. And of course, Amazon has done that, and its valuation, its market cap is considerably more. You're seeing this in the prosaic world of taxi cabs. The last major innovation in taxi cabs was when they moved from horse-drawn carriages to cars. That was about 100 some years ago. But now you have Uber. And of course, Uber doesn't own any assets other than some IT infrastructure, which even that is rented. And Uber's market cap is 70 billion. Same thing's happening in hotel rooms, right? The largest hotel operators, Airbnb, they don't own a room. They just control the information. So you can go industry after industry and see this playing out. So what does this mean? It means that if you're a legacy company, and i.e. a big established firm, if you aren't thinking about reinventing yourself in these fundamental terms, you're likely going to be toast. Right? I talk about CEOs having two choices. You either disrupt or you're disrupted. And there's no prize, it turns out, in the economics of information for coming in second. Due to an economic phenomenon called increasing returns, there is a very strange outcome in most industries where the winner takes all. We first saw this in the PC industry, right? The winner was the Wintel monopoly, Windows and Intel, Microsoft Intel. And they captured 90% of the industry's profits. Then you saw with the economics of mobile phones, Apple and Samsung, 80% of industry profits. Online advertising, Google plus Facebook, 90% of industry profits. It's hard to tell who's next, right? You take even the taxi cab hailing services. So Uber's market cap, 68 billion. Lyft, 5 billion. Third, there isn't a third. So there is a very, very strange phenomenon in this new economy where if you're not number one or two, you're really irrelevant. Now, is this universally true? I didn't know. But about 18 months ago, I got called on by the government to try and help turn around a government bank, a big government bank with 70 million customers. Now, I don't know much about banking. I know even less about government. But for some strange reason, this opportunity came along. And this is a 108-year-old bank that I'm part of. And it was started by the Maharaja of Baroda. And it has survived the freedom struggle. It has survived colonial rule. It has survived nationalization by the government. It has survived multiple financial crises. But for the first time, I and others are nervous. We are facing an existential threat. And where is this existential threat coming from? It's coming from startups, which are called fintech companies. They use technology to do everything that banks have historically done: payments, remittances, lending to consumers or small businesses, and they do it better, faster, cheaper. Okay, and they're funded by large amounts of venture capital. So this is a big, big, big issue for us. And so why can't a big bank or a big existing organization copy or move faster? I'll tell you why. So one of the things we've struggled to understand is, how do these guys make money? Okay. A bank charges for every transaction. Every time you go to an ATM and pull out some money, there's a tiny fee. Every time you swipe your credit card, there's a little nibble that we take. And that's how that's part of how you make money. These new firms, they're very strange. Not only do they not charge you, they give you money back when you use their services. So you start wondering, how sustainable is this? At some point, venture capital is going to run out, and the music's got to stop. It turns out that they think about it actually quite differently. What they're after is actually the data. What these new breed of companies think about is data as the new currency. I think that's a fashionable term that they use. So what they have is an accurate picture of every transaction of every person. And so think about a student like many of you. You don't have a lot of assets yet. And so most big banks won't lend you money. But actually, you're fairly creditworthy. Why? Because you're spending money on lots of things, on tuition, on food, on your dorm room, and a whole bunch of things, right? And if you actually take all your cash flow, we can predict, are you a good credit risk or are you a bad credit risk? We also know from the profile of your transactions, what do you like to spend money on? So if you're a lender, suddenly I have a great deal of insight about your credit risk as well as what you like, and I can start sending you marketing offers to you, right? And that's worth a lot of money. So a bank has to reinvent itself as an IT organization, as essentially a data business. And all the physical assets, whether it's a branch, an ATM network, internet banking, they're basically scoops for data. Now that takes such a big mindset shift and such a different set of capabilities than a bank has typically got, that we're really, really slow. And as I said, there's no prize for coming in second or third. So this is what worries me, and this is what's playing out in industry after industry that I'm associated with. And I think it's the same in every part of the world. So that's happening at the company level. Last thing is, what does it mean for individuals? What does this fourth industrial revolution mean for people like you and I, professionals, particularly engineers who are about to be unleashed on this world? I don't know. Yesterday, we were shown around campus by 3 young students, Sarah, who I see out there, Nick, and they said, well, life's good. We're all about to graduate soon. And I said, are there any concerns about jobs? No. We'll have at least one job offer. Amazon, Tesla, they're all hiring. Life's good. I said, wow, this is different from the picture I get in some other parts of the world. In fact, I hope that scenario is true. I hope life goes on, this party goes on forever. But there's some discomforting data that suggests that there might be a different future. There are at least 3 surveys which have come out which says that 50%, 45 to 50% of all the tasks that even the highest end knowledge workers do can be automated today. And now we're talking about CEOs, doctors, accountants, software developers. Okay? 45% of the tasks that we all do can be automated today, which means you can't eliminate whole jobs, but it does say that you can probably theoretically double productivity. If you double productivity for the same amount of work, you need fewer people, right? So at some point, this jobs issue is going to manifest pretty hard. It already is in some parts of the world. It's going to manifest here too. There's a study from the Oxford Martin School of Business, and they've taken the best stab at forecasting things. And they've said 45% of all jobs in the US, 2/3 of all jobs in India, and 3/4 of all jobs in China will not exist in 25 years. Okay? Obviously, they're talking also about a lot of low-end jobs, manual work where robots will come in, etc. Now, is this fear-mongering? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball that's any better than yours. But I look at some early signs, and it's disquieting. Last year, Chinese factories installed more robots than they hired people. Okay? I don't know what conclusion to draw, but it seems interesting. India's the world's IT factory. Every year, Indian IT companies, it's a $100 billion business. They hire, 100,000 engineers or more. I'm on the board of a company called Infosys. 3 years ago, we would hire 45,000. This year, it's actually declining. And that's not because there isn't growth. The companies are growing at about 10%. It's just that you need fewer people to do it because software is automating a lot of low-level development work. Right? So I think there is anecdotal evidence beginning to emerge, like climate change, that there is some more fundamental trend out here that is perhaps true. What does this mean? To me, it means that there is a scenario out there which says that rising tide that lifted all boats for the last few decades may not continue to be quite so reliable, right? So in my generation, it was pretty simple. 30 years ago, that's when I graduated. If you came out from a good school, you had a versatile, engineering degree, ME, EE, IE, whatever, and you tried not to pick a fight with your boss, the chances are you could hold on to a job. At worst, you might have to change jobs a couple of times, and then, life would be okay. I'm not sure whether that playbook is going to last much longer. What I think, at the very least, what you're going to find is the companies that you work for are going to go through very, very turbulent times, disruption and all that stuff. And so, chances are that's going to be very, very choppy. And so what does it mean? I think I'd give 3 pieces of advice to anybody graduating today and for those who graduated some time ago. The first is, I think you have to be far more intentional about your professional life. What does intentional mean? I think what I'm trying to convey is you can't just be a piece of driftwood and hope that the current of life, is kind to you. That's how many generations of engineers have been. I think you have to think about what am I uniquely good at and try and build a professional life around it. You have to hone those skills and be ready to rent it out to multiple employers. Okay? You have to think about yourself increasingly not as hired hands, but rather as a professional with a set of skills, and you're a free agent, and you're renting it out to this organization today, and then tomorrow you might rent it out to someone else. And if you play that game fairly well, I think it's still going to be fine. I'll give you an example from my own life. Fairly early, actually even before I got to Purdue, I realized I'm not a great engineer. Okay, I got really good grades, but that was mostly because of hard work. But I didn't know what else to do, so I kept persevering. And then I ended up in Columbus, Indiana at Cummins, and I was a shop floor engineer. And there I realized, oh, I do have a skill. I'm quite good at getting things done. I'm very organized, good execution is what it's called. I'm good at motivating people to rally behind some goal and getting stuff done, selling ideas to my boss. In a word, I was a pretty good business guy. And so I went off to Harvard Business School, studied general management, and went down that stream, and things worked out okay. So again, it's about consciously realizing and not deluding yourself about what your strengths are and aren't. Then I come to about 2003. I'd been so far, in the world of Cummins, the company had been good, and I got an opportunity. Microsoft wanted somebody to build its business in India. And I was very, very tempted. Microsoft, 2003. This is before Apple, Google, and all those guys came and spoiled the party. But then 10 out of 10 people I said, don't do it. My family, my closest mentors said, don't do this. This is going to end badly. You don't know anything about technology. It's a harsh culture. This is going to end really badly. Stay away. And I asked myself, age 40, right? When I turn 50, which will I regret more? Having had this chance and passed on it, or, I tried it and got fired for incompetence 2 years later. And I said, I'm going to try it the other way. I'm going to take a chance. But I'm going to see this not as a long career, but as a gig, as a project. Who knows how long it'll last? But I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to have some fun. We'll see. It ended up being a good gig, lasted 8 years. Okay? And it kept me, this framing kept me sane. And this is what I'm suggesting is how you might look at your professional career, right? You're a free agent. Life is a series of projects, etc. As we were driving down from Milwaukee to West Lafayette the other night, I was chatting with my sister-in-law, Julia, who's here, and I was telling her all this. She says, what's the big deal? This is how, she's a liberal arts major, and she says, this is how artists have always been. Okay? They've always been self-employed. They have always been intentional about the work that they want to create, whether it's a sculpture or a painting. And then they do that, and then having completed one work, they start thinking about the next. So what is so great about your insight? She has a way of deflating me. But I think that's a really powerful metaphor. We are the artists of our life. We're the sculptors of our life. And that's the spirit in which we should approach it. And I think if you do that, you're going to be better off. So this intentional life is one principle. The second important idea is learning agility. Now, what is learning agility? So from 2010 to 13, I spent a lot of time researching and writing my book. And one of the questions I was trying to understand is, why are some leaders so successful and effective? Okay? And I'm not sure I ever got to the core of that, but I did get to one important insight, that really successful people have a quality that psychologists called learning agility. What is learning agility? Well, in a certain sense, it means boundless curiosity about things, the ability and interest in learning new skills and new things. But most of all, it has to do with how does a person deal with uncertainty and a situation that they've never, ever experienced. Okay? So think about yourself. Let's say you don't know how to swim and somebody pushes you and you're in the deep body of water without a life jacket. What do? Well, some people will say a prayer and drown. Others are going to shout and flail about and hope to get somebody's attention and rescued. And there is a small minority of people who will stay calm, find something floating, and then figure out how to paddle, and then eventually get to safety. And in an uncertain, volatile world, this quality becomes really important. So this is what psychologists and human resource guys call learning agility. Fortunately, two things. You can measure it, so it's not a feeling. So I no longer hire senior executives or promote senior executives without testing them for this. And it's a pretty powerful predictor of success. And the second thing is you're not doomed if you're not born with learning agility. It's a muscle that you can develop by exercising. How do you do it? Well, you repeatedly put yourself outside your comfort zone. You repeatedly, every now and then, take on big challenges, different challenges. And that's how you build a broader and broader skill set, self-confidence, and a broader and broader network. I didn't know all this when I started out in life, but by accident, it turns out that's what I've been doing. So every 7 years or so, I've been telling Abhi that like clockwork, something happens and I end up doing something wildly different. So 1985, I had a chance to go to the best business school in India. I came to Purdue, okay? It seemed like a bigger adventure. I thought life's worked out pretty well. Then in 1996, life was going pretty well, and I decided to go back to India at a time when the economy was just opening. Everybody said this is a bad decision, but it seemed like a good adventure. 2003, I left Cummins and joined Microsoft, that whole story. And again, most people would not take such a radical shift. 2010, I decided to leave and never be an employee again, and I had no plan. Okay, but I said, okay, we'll figure it out. And it's again been quite an adventure. 2015, I'd become a banker. It's the last thing I would have ever predicted, right? So every few years, if you do something profoundly different, take on a fresh challenge, and then spend the next few years making it work, I think you develop a very robust way of learning, which works quite well. Last thing is people. Right, so intentional life, learning agility. The third thing is people. I'm often asked, how the heck have you gone across so many different industries, right? From diesel engines, software, venture capital, men's apparel. That's a part of my life I don't talk much about. And then banking and so forth. Yeah, so, and to me it all seems quite common sense. Why? Because all these organizations are composed of people. So if you know how to connect with people, and more importantly, if you become reasonably okay at making good people decisions, that's all there is. What is good people decisions? Being very quickly able to size up what are your strengths and weaknesses and put you in a role where your strengths matter more than your weakness, getting people to collaborate behind a common objective, those kinds of things. Now, engineers are generally quite poor at these things, okay? So most of us are not born gifted. I wasn't. I was an introvert. I still am. And we tend to have relatively poor social skills. That's not universally true, but highly correlated with an engineering background. And so it's something you have to work at. Now, and I worked at it. One of my earliest bosses gave me great advice. He said to me, the people who work for you will have a bigger impact on how far you get, far more than the people you work for. It's a convoluted way of saying your team matters more than your boss. And I thought that was great advice. And I consciously started working hard to build good teams. And if I have ever achieved anything, it's really because I put together decent teams, amazing people who did amazing things. And so this is a skill that you need to very consciously practice, because there are very few things in life where you can work in splendid isolation, with a computer and write a bit of code and become a billionaire. I mean, that stuff exists in fables. Generally, you have to work with people. The other thing I discovered is that really wildly successful leaders are not perfect human beings by any means. They're just like you and us, profoundly flawed, large weaknesses. But there's a difference. They're aware of their weaknesses, and they have strategies to cope with it. So 2004 to 2007, I spent a lot of time working around Bill Gates. Now, Bill's a very, very smart guy. He has an amazing capacity for risk and all that. But he has huge weaknesses, okay? He has very poor social skills, the attention span of a gnat, okay, quickly gets bored and moves on to the next thing. And these are not traits that help you build giant successful businesses. But Bill's amazingly good at knowing what he's not good at and hiring people around him to compensate for it. So much of Microsoft's success is due not just to the genius of Bill, but the genius of the team. So, for instance, Paul Allen is technically far better than Bill. The business genius in Microsoft was that bald guy called Steve Ballmer who liked to throw chairs. The only other guy was, I think, Bobby Knight of Indiana University. But and then Bill had the great good sense to marry Melinda. And Melinda was the most sobering, benign influence on him. And then he decides he needs mentors, so he makes Warren Buffett his mentor and some others, his dad, Bill Sr., mentor. So I think successful people are very clear about what they're not good at, and they have ways of de-risking this in a very, very intentional way. And this is a skill, I think, that would be more and more invaluable in the years to come. So let me pause here. I've postulated a bunch of things. Jobs are going to be tougher and scarcer. You better think of yourself as self-employed, better yet, entrepreneurs, although not everybody is cut out to be an entrepreneur. You really need to go out being intentional and deliberate in thinking about your life. Oh, by the way, I was having a good chat with Abhi yesterday. He heads the School of Industrial Engineering, for those of you who are not IE. And we were talking about design thinking, right? It's this new way of approaching really complex, wicked problems, like how do you feed the world, how do you deal with climate change, etc. And these two Stanford professors have now got a book called Design Your Life. How do you apply the principles of design thinking to thinking about your professional life, and how do you build prototypes and fail fast and do all those kinds of things that a lean startup does. I highly recommend it. The really interesting question that I'm now spending a lot of time on is how do you steer a country the size and complexity of India on a good path, okay? Because it's just a mind-bogglingly complex thing. We've got a prime minister who's a very vigorous leader. Some of you may have heard of him, a gentleman called Mr. Modi. He's trying to do his best, but his model of change is very top-down, and it's not clear that it's going to work. I hope he succeeds, but I doubt that a top-down model will work in a country like ours. So I've been thinking a lot about what will be more robust. And so I've come to a point of view which I shared with some of the faculty this morning, that ultimately it's about the institutions and the strength of the institutions of a country that really matter, like the justice system, like your banking system, and who's in charge of it. And how do you get good people into these key positions, okay? And of course, that begs a lot of questions. How do you define good person? How do you identify and strengthen them? And most importantly, how do you get them into these roles? So I'm looking at the kind of interventions and building a network of people who will try and nudge this whole thing in the right direction. So that's, to me, the ultimate wicked problem. Yeah, and to me, the bank is actually only a pilot or a lab for testing a lot of my ideas. That's why I decided to do this thankless job.
Let me ask you, from an engineering point of view, being an engineering faculty at an engineering school, what do you see as sort of engineering 4.0, where engineering should evolve to really meet the needs of everyone?
You've stumped me. You've stumped me. I think the most important thing is, I think the more you go back to strong fundamentals and instill in engineers two things, a disciplined way of reasoning, the ability to learn new things, and most of all, if you get engineers to start thinking about their place in society so that they take on worthy challenges. I'm sick and tired of really bright people in India, good engineers from IITs, building another feature on another inane product. I think it's such a waste of a good engineer, right? So to me, 4.0 is actually about soft things. So robustness on the, on science, a disciplined way of reasoning, and this ability to think about your place in society and take on problems that are worthy of you. If you can do that, I think a lot of other things will follow. But I don't think many institutions today attempt to do that, and I think that's the opportunity for us.
As you were talking about the challenges that you see that India is facing now in terms of getting to the fourth wave, I was reflecting about the similar challenges that we are facing here in the United States. Currently, at least in my opinion, this is a time of a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I was reflecting about how strong is the system, first of all, to be resilient to this form of oscillation that we encounter, and whether this is bringing to, at the long run, to a better place, or there is a serious risk of
I think it's a question we are asking ourselves in all parts of the world, right? So right now, the word that is used in business to describe this environment is called VUCA, V-U-C-A, and it's a Marine Corps term called volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Okay? And so the question is, how do you lead and manage in a VUCA world? And it takes a very different approach, right? The old hierarchical system where you pass orders down and they do as they're instructed doesn't work anymore. And so we're all trying to come up with new models of leading, managing, and controlling complex systems. And we don't know. But to me, there is one fundamental thing you better do no matter what, which is get sound people into key positions. Okay, and that's an easier task to describe than accomplish. But if we've got any hope of taking a plane through incredibly turbulent weather and landing safely, you better have competent crew, right? So it's just that simple metaphor. Whether we're talking about one organization or a complex thing like a society, a country, this is the problem that we have to find a way to accomplish. In all uncertainty lies opportunity. So while there's risk, there's also a great deal of possibility and upside and all that, to your point. And we shouldn't see the glass as only half empty. It's also glass full, half full. Enormous opportunities, whether at the individual level or the big country level. But whether it fructifies that way depends ultimately on us. Again and again in audiences in India, I tell people not to feel like victims, that they too are part of the solution. And if you go in with that mindset and you make a local difference, it adds up. And so I think I'm hopeful.
Yeah, so I'm hearing really two quite different things from your talk. So you're talking a lot about small scale entrepreneurship, personal responsibility.
Yeah.
But yet at the same time, you also told us about, there's no room for second, or not much room for second, no room for third. So you're talking about large scale enterprises, or at least leading enterprises in various fields. How do you put those two together? How do you get, how do you go from small scale entrepreneurship to developing, the first and second, members of an industry without large amounts of venture capital, top-down control, all those kinds of things that you think
It's a wonderful, wonderful question, right? So this idea that the winner takes all, there's number one, number two, is not my idea. It seems to be the laws of economics whenever there is increasing returns and network effects. So it's just a fact. And some company gets lucky or whatever, they're good and they get to that position. They become industry platforms. But there's plenty of room for other companies to ride on that platform. So you take a platform like Amazon. There are plenty of other guys who are got good, viable businesses transacting on that platform. So I think there is room for many, but a disproportionate share of the industry profit pool is captured by the guy who ends up owning the platform. So I think we all need to do our bit, innovate, build enterprises, try and row towards becoming a platform company, knowing that the odds of it are pretty low. But, I think there is room for vibrant, local, mid-sized businesses that will continue to exist. I certainly don't claim to have answers. I'm just sort of essentially saying that this is a time of incredibly convulsive change that I see. And in that convulsive change is both opportunity and threat. So, yes?
So I'm intrigued by your agility test that you give
Yeah, learning agility.
to learning agility. And as I was thinking about that, to me that seems the willingness to take risk and the willingness to fail.
Yeah.
Because that's that if you take a risk, you can fail. And I'm wondering if part of that, when you look for people or for the students in the room, do you also consider people who have failed and their ability to recover?
Might not quite be successful, but it's true in life. And so learning agility is a proxy for all these things. And yeah, this thing about risk, I'm a pretty risk-averse person. But it's like any muscle. The more often you take some risk and then work to make it successful, the more comfortable it feels. So it's like any old muscle. You just have to get comfortable staring at fear in the face, staring it down, and and the earlier you start, the better. I started a bit late. Otherwise, I would have been an entrepreneur, I think, like Shimon.
You talked about difference between Indian universities and universities in the US focusing on research and graduate education. What I'd like to do is ask a question about the right student-teacher ratio in higher education.
I'm afraid I have to turn to you or Suresh or somewhere else for answers. But I think, again, the models are, I don't know about higher education. I was talking to some faculty about the choice of whether to expand and go down that path of churning out large numbers of engineers and low cost of delivery, and that's one choice. And the other one is to focus on turning out people who will change the world, right? Small numbers of people who may change the world. And it's hard under a single roof to do both, I think, okay? So I think there is a choice that every institution has to make in terms of where they want to dial themselves. For society to function, you need to do both. But right now, given all this flux and and pressure on innovation and the need to create the future, I would dial it more towards a small place that churns out transformational thinkers and leaders and whatnot, which argues more in terms of smaller, higher touch, more space to think out of the box, and so on and so forth. I don't know, but that's my preference. I don't think I even have a vote here. But but it's a choice that the institution faces. This is the same thing true in India. Right now we have 68% or 70% literacy rate. Now that sounds not terrible, but it's tragic. It means 300 million people or 400 million people who are illiterate, okay? And a good number of that 70% are not functionally literate. So the government has huge pressure to do something to get everybody through a school. But the reality is you need some small number of people who are going to come up with the game-changing ideas and the game-changing sort of institutions and so forth. And we have nothing that is truly aimed at that, okay? I think you have to have both.
Your articles you recently published about the H-1B reform, where you said Indian IT companies, American companies in India have helped create 400,000 jobs.
No, Indian companies operating in America. Yeah, blah, 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 yeah.
How is that so, and how is the H-1B program going to impact both countries moving?
The whole issue is because your new president is very keen to push immigration reform, particularly for high-skilled workers, and protect jobs here. And it's not just one of the sort of countries that's going to be quite impacted by this change is India, because we have a lot of IT talent that moves back and forth. And Indian companies are the biggest beneficiary of the H-1B visa, right? And so that party might be coming to an end. Now, well, my arguments were very simple. First of all, it's not like Indian companies have benefited and Americans have lost. I think there have been winners on both sides and there have been losers on both sides. So American companies have benefited because you've got low-cost IT. Okay, it's done a great deal for the competitiveness of whether it's a Microsoft or a GE or a General Motors, because they've got large pools of people going back and forth, etc. So to frame this in terms of winners versus losers is rather simplistic, not to mention wrong. That was one point. There's no question that Indian IT has to also evolve its model. It can't just be continuing to rest on labor arbitrage for as long as it has. It has to move up into more innovation-driven work. And this might be the other point I made in the article is this kick in the butt might be exactly what the industry needs to move, right? Because unless there is a compulsion, organizations tend to stay in place. So, this may have a perverse positive outcome, getting the industry to move along. But in any case, I think the real implication is for the workers in the IT industry. I think they have to reinvent themselves in terms of skills. I feel like Atlas. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.